The death of Minneapolis resident George Floyd left many around the globe feeling angered, confused, and inspired to do more. Associate professor and former radio journalist Traci Griffith joined with the New England News Collective to share stories of the bias to minorities across a perceived liberal New England. That collaboration resulted in the current 4-part series Racism in New England, which runs across public media and online. Connecting Point's Dara asked if Traci's subjects would support diversity on the presidential ticket by bringing out the voiceless vote.
You know, there's so much I want to get to with you. I mean, you're just doing amazing things up there in that media department at St. Michael's College, and we're going to talk to you about this important 4-part segment that you guys are doing on racism in New England. But before we get to that, can we just talk about the history-making moments that are happening right now as we are 3 weeks away from the presidential election? I know that you have studied what's been happening leading up to this with Kamala Harris. How did you think she performed in this historical debate in her vice presidential debut?
I think she did an enormous, incredible job. I mean, she is faced with a lot of challenges being a female candidate, and I think she met those challenges quite well.
There are a lot of challenges because she is a woman and she is a woman of color, and she checks a ton of boxes. And because you have kind of studied this racism segment of what's going on in our country, what do you think was most accomplished by Joe Biden putting her on the ticket?
Well, I think it brought a lot of people into the conversation that before had been largely excluded, right? We saw last time around with Hillary Clinton and the move towards getting a woman onto that national stage and the challenges that she faced. In a class that I created called, it's a media studies class, Race, Gender, and Ethnicity in Media, there's a whole segment where we talk about women in politics and the challenges that women face, the way that they are assessed, the way that they are critiqued in ways that men are never critiqued, right? So oftentimes it's about the way she looks, or oftentimes the questions are maybe sometimes a little light, not policy questions, but more fluff questions. They're treated in ways that we would never think of treating male candidates, things that are said about them, the way they're described. And so we recognize that Kamala Harris has this challenge to face as well, similar to Hillary Clinton in the last election. And I think she did a fantastic job last night in maintaining her calm, being very even-tempered, right? Because we often hear women are too emotional. She was very even-tempered. She addressed the vice president in ways that demanded or required respect from him. I'm talking, right? That was an aspect that I think a lot of people that I've spoken to this morning and friends that I was watching the debate with virtually last night commented on. And so I think she is really rising to the occasion.
Yeah, you actually just made a very interesting point. There were some moments from Kamala, Senator Harris, where she did kind of insert her own respect. And when you watched her in the debate, 2 questions here. What stood out to you most about kind of her demeanor from a woman's standpoint? And how much do you think that the way she did handle kind of him cutting her off and her not getting the same amount of time, how did that translate to the everyday woman, regardless of color, because of the things that women go through in society?
Well, let's be clear, right? There are so many occasions where women have been talked down to, talked over, just basically overlooked and ignored. And Senator Harris was having none of that last night, right? She was very forceful in saying, I am speaking now, you will listen to me, Mr. Vice President, right? She was respectful, but she was also demanding the respect for herself as well. And I think that everyday women, no matter what area you might work in, what area you might live in, you have encountered that in many different areas of your life, right? And so I think that's something that a lot of women can identify with. And it's interesting that right now, that's part of a problem that the Trump campaign is having. They are worried about those suburban women, right? And I think that what she what she went through last night, right? I think that there are a lot of women, suburban women, who can identify with that and saw themselves and recall the number of times that they themselves had to deal with that kind of issue. And so I think she was very good at identifying and identifying with regular women who were living through that routinely.
How does it make you feel? I mean, this is kind of a personal question, to have her on this global stage, for the opportunity for her to be in the White House as a VP candidate. And, there's lots of talk if, Vice President Biden doesn't go the full term, that, she would be next in line. Just in general, can you speak to the importance of that?
Okay, well, first off, heaven forbid that Vice President Biden, right, something should happen to him. But it's wonderful to know that if something horrible like that were to happen, that the United States would be in the hands of an intelligent, competent, successful, driven, educated woman, right? That's what we want. We want our country to be led by people who are capable, right? Who are capable of handling all of the dilemmas that come with that position. And I firmly believe that Kamala is capable of that. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We are working in terms of the Biden-Harris campaign. They are looking towards a Biden presidency with Kamala Harris as vice president. So, but it's good to know that, capable hands are there at the ready.
Is this diversity push going to bring out the diverse vote?
First, I don't know that it should be referenced as a diversity push. Kamala Harris is she's capable, right? She is absolutely capable of being in the position she is. The added benefit is that she's a woman of color, right? So the initial thing that we need to keep in mind is that they chose someone who was competent. That's the most important aspect, right? Her being a woman and her being a woman of color is not going to help her if she is dealing, if she is incapable of handling the challenges. So first off, picking a woman who is competent and then a woman who has the added benefit of being a woman of color is what we're looking at and what we're dealing with. So in terms of being a woman of color, there are things that she brings to the table that many other members within our society do not, right? And so a differing perspective. Let's be clear, right? Prior to Obama, we chose the head of our country from roughly 6% of our population, right? First, you have to narrow it down into the less than 50% that are male. Then you have to narrow it down into the percentage that are white males. Then you have to narrow it down into those who are Ivy League educated, who are millionaires, when you start, you realize for the last how many years we've chosen our leader from 6% of our population. There has to be more out there, right? There have to be people out there who are just as smart, just as capable, and bring unique perspectives to the job. And that's what Kamala Harris does. So whether she is a woman, whether she is a minority, the first aspect is she's competent.
Right, without gender and without race. And actually, you just said something that made me think about this 4-part series that you are co-hosting over on the New England News Collaborative. When you start talking about the 6%, like we've chosen our leaders from this group of 6% of people, right? They're all kind of the same. When you guys were working on this, well, you still are working on it because it runs from September 18th to October 9th. The series in particular that stood out to me was the one on housing. When you and listening to you, you know, and some of the people you were talking to, they felt like they didn't have a voice. They felt like they haven't been heard. They felt like even when they walk in a room, or in this case, when they walk to go get housing, or when they were moving in certain parts of the country, it was still just this kind of 6% of the people that mattered, right? Kind of the people that you just talked about that we elect. Those seem to be the only people that mattered, right? How are you thinking that those people you spoke to in your special are feeling about this moment in history right now?
They're probably feeling like there is finally an opportunity to see themselves reflected in, this home that we call America. That they see themselves, they see this as an opportunity to see people like them. And, particularly for kids, right? My son has only known Barack Obama and Donald Trump, right? And so when you think about that, what is this new or continuing administration going to mean to the kids who are coming up now? And having someone like Kamala Harris in a place where she has a voice and is seen as having power and influence on our country is a powerful thing, particularly for kids who have not understood that there are many other kinds of voices out there, and maybe they feel like maybe they might be heard.
Can you talk to us about some of the voices that you've been speaking to in this 4-part special? And I don't know if I'm doing it justice, but if you're watching out there, please, you have to go and listen to this Racism in New England 4-part series. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how it came to be and some of the voices and people that you're meeting?
So back in June, after George Floyd was killed, we did a special on racism in policing. And out of that grew this extended series where we looked at racism in different aspects of our communities. I think the very first episode that talked about the history of racism in New England, I think that was really powerful to begin in that way, because it really talked about how, racism in New England is not something we often think, oh, well, we're the progressive area of the country, right? This really didn't affect us so greatly. But I think one of the things that we learned out of that particular episode is that the entire country was complicit in the slave trade, with many of the financing coming from New England. So even though many within the New England states didn't own slaves, they certainly benefited from slavery. So whether that is banks that financed the slave trade and financed the ships that traveled over to Africa to gather slaves, to capture slaves, or whether it was the mills, the many mills that we had here in New England that were processing the cotton, right? The textile mills that existed in New England. All of the people who were involved in that were somehow involved in the slave trade, although they may not have owned slaves. So for that first episode, that was one of the more significant things for me that came out of it, is that understanding that there was a level of complicity in New England. The second series where we talked about housing, it's much more than just redlining. It's the inability of people to own property, right? That owning property is a way in which people gain wealth in our country. And if you don't own property, if you rent, you don't have the standing within the community to necessarily have your voice heard as it relates to issues, significant issues in your community. Our education episode was significant in that you think back to the things that you learned, right? The Southern Poverty Law Center says that within our country, we have a 9-word problem as it relates to civil rights. That generally kids come out of school knowing 9 words: Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and I have a dream. That's it. And so it talks about how there are people within our New England communities that are looking to kind of change the curriculum, to bring in more diverse voices within the curriculum. And that's important in terms of how we educate our children. And then, when we talk about disparities in healthcare, COVID has kind of laid bare the many disparities that exist within our societies. And access to healthcare, and last night during the debate, that was a key issue, right? So if we do come up with a vaccine, who will have access to it? Will they have to pay for it? Is it going to be recurring? Access to healthcare is a huge issue within our society, and oftentimes those who are working, those essential jobs, are people from underrepresented communities, and they are affected the most.
And so when you were talking, having these conversations with kind of the people that said that they can't be heard, they feel like they're not seen, kind of what surprised you the most in some of those stories?
I think the pervasiveness of it, right? So we talked with students, we talked with educators, we talked with medical doctors. It really, kind of ran the gamut, and there were common themes that existed throughout the entire experience, no matter who we were speaking with, right? And so when you hear Vice President Pence say that there's no such thing as institutional racism, the people who are living it day to day, they say there is, right? They say there is. And so it's important to listen to those voices, right? It's their experience. You can't deny their experience. And I think that what we're seeing in the streets now is that people's lived experiences have been denied for too long, and it's boiling over. And so that's one of the key things that I thought was really important in the series, is that no matter who we talk to, their experiences were real, and they were finally being given an opportunity to speak about them in a forum where people were listening.
Yeah, I thought it was really great how you guys had a varying voice, right? You had the Latino voice, you had the white man's voice, you had the white woman's voice, the black woman's voice, the people that say they're highly educated, they move around, they didn't think that there would be an issue until they get into some small town within New England and they realize they're the only one, and why is everyone looking at me? And yeah, it's just been a fabulous, fabulous series. Can you tell us when it ends, October 9th, what's the last series?
The last one is dealing with racial disparities in education. It will air this weekend.
Okay, great. And so we can catch that. It's been on every Friday, and they run an hour. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and tell everyone where they can hear it.
They can hear it through the New England News Collaborative on any of their local PBS or public radio stations.